On this week's show, our month-long celebration of horror comes to a close, and what better place to end things than in that misty town where our darkest fears come to life. Sam Barlow, known for his work on the iconic Silent Hill franchise and most recently, the critically acclaimed Her Story and Telling Lies, is here to tell us his story. So stock up on some health drinks, and don't you dare touch that radio dial. This is Nintendo Dual Screens, episode 124. Hello everybody, welcome to Nintendo Dual Screens episode 124 for the week of October 28th, 2019. It is almost All Hallows Eve. It's almost upon us, ladies and gentlemen. This, of course, is sponsored by MeltedPins.com. I am one of your hosts, Stephen Fontana, and with me, as always, each and every week, he is Andy Asimakis. How are you, Andy?
You know what I love, Stephen, about the pre-show that's not on record? It's the before we actually hit record with the guest.
Sure.
You always tell them, if you have to stop for some reason, let us know, yada, yada. I always laugh because for a second I feel they'll say, oh, I got to stop. And we'll say, oh, what's wrong? And they'll say, you both are terrible.
It's a fair assessment.
You're both
It's a fair assessment. You are just horrid people. With us this week, as I mentioned in our beautiful opening, we have Sam Barlow. How are you, Sam?
I'm good. Hi, guys. I'm still here.
There you go.
Yes, you're still here.
Stop and leave.
You haven't pulled that ripcord just yet, but don't worry, there's time. For those of you that are new to Nintendo Dual Screens podcast, just like Sam is, this is an interview show where Andy and I bring on an industry guest to talk about the indies and Nintendo's past, present, and future. Nintendo Dual Screens posts each and every Monday for your listening pleasure on your podcast service of choice, including YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And of course, you can find all of our content, everything we write, everything we record, everything we video, right on dualscreens.com. That's DUEL screens.com. Please, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving us a review. It helps the show out tremendously. The more reviews you get, the more visual, the more visibility you have for your show on Apple Podcasts. So we do appreciate that.
It's all about the algorithms.
Absolutely. You got to beat the algorithms.
Those algorithms.
Got to do it. Got to pump it in. I haven't quite figured out Google's algorithm yet. I think you just need to be horrible, and they'll just put you right at the top. You could also support us monetarily if you got $1 or so. You could go on to patreon.com/NDSPodcast, just like our Patreon producer, Alex Gonzalez. We cannot continue to grow without all of you guys' support. So please head over to patreon.com/NDSPodcast, and for as little as $1, you could help this show out, help us grow, help us get better equipment, help us send us to different conventions all across the country. You guys got us to PAX East this year. That was you. You guys made that possible, and we cannot thank you enough. And we want to go to PAX East next year, so we're going to need your help. Also, remember, $1, all it takes is $1, and that $1 gets you access to our VIP Discord channel where we hang out with you, you hang out with each other, and also our indie dev guests come in and hang out with us as well. So it's a really great place to hang out. Plus, you get a bonus episode each and every month where you vote the topic. And of course, there are other tiers as well, $5, $10, $25, and our Patreon producer tier at $50 if you want to get a shout out each and every episode. All right, so that's the rigmarole, that's the spiel. I think I'm getting better at that, Andy. 124 episodes in.
Yeah, it took you long enough. You almost nailed it.
We're 4 minutes in. That's not bad.
You're so close to being so good at this part of the show.
Yeah, I think so. Well, to be fair, this version of that intro is only a few months old.
Right.
To be fair. But I digress. So we are. This is going to be a deep dive, folks. So this isn't going to be your regular news show like we did last week. We're actually recording this a little bit in advance so that this could be round out our month of horror. So you're not going to get any topical stuff here as far as news goes, but Sam was gracious enough to come on the show, and we have so many questions to ask Sam. So, Sam Barlow, give us the crash course on who Sam Barlow is for those who don't know your name.
So Sam Barlow is. It's fun talking in the third person. I am a. I think Wikipedia says I'm a British game designer, director. So I've been making games for a while. Made some bad ones, made some mediocre ones, and got to work on 2 Silent Hill games. That was when I started making the more interesting ones. The first one being Origins, which is a thoroughly mediocre Silent Hill game. But in being a thoroughly mediocre Silent Hill game is maybe the greatest achievement of my career and that team's career, because I'm sure we'll get into this, but that was a tricky project. After that, we got to make another Silent Hill game, and we made Silent Hill Shattered Memories, which was maybe the first time as a game writer, director, I got to sit down and go, these are all these cool ideas I have, given essentially a blank slate. Let's go do something cool. And that was a very fun game. And did some more stuff after that, and probably only became a name of any sort to gamers after that when I went indie. And 2015, I put out this game, Her Story, which was a kind of a gothic crime story told with live action video, had some kind of very different game mechanics going on there. And we just put out this year a Telling Lies, which plays with similar ideas and is this, it's a game about listening into private conversations and kind of plays with surveillance, the clash between people's private lives and government and law and order. But still has some weird stuff in there. But yeah,
awesome. Yeah, like that your name was always one of those names that I kept hearing, but I didn't know anything about the person. It was just one of those things. Oh, Sam Barlow. Oh, Sam Barlow. Oh, okay, Sam Barlow. Okay. Like I listen to a lot of IGN podcasts. I listen to a lot of Kind of Funny podcasts, and like your name does come up quite often, as does Her Story. But I want to go a little bit further back. Let's start with, how did you get started as a writer for video games specifically?
So I'll try and do the short version of this one. So like I grew up in England during like the 8-bit home computer era. So like in England, we didn't have the NES. We didn't really get into consoles till a bit later, but we had all these home computers. So we had the popular ones were the Spectrum and the Commodore, but there was also the Amstrad, which was the one that I had, which was kind of like the Donald Trump home computer. Well, in England, our version of The Apprentice, we have this guy, Alan Sugar, who's like the British Donald Trump. And at this point, he decided he wanted a home computer, and the Amstrad CPC was his version. So like I grew up in that kind of, if you watch Bandersnatch, like that was the world of like these weird British games and all these kind of little rock star programmers. And so I grew up in that world and would, type in games and do all the awful stuff. And so really when I started writing bad kid stuff, I was writing that adventure before I was writing the terrible novels, etc. that, I would hit once I got to my teens. So I was always having fun making games, and me and my friends would write sort of bad comedy games that we'd share with each other that were usually like wrote this series of text adventures that were all about one of my friends trying to get laid, and so he would then have to play these games as himself, and everything he would try and do in the games would just be an excuse for me to fail him within the structure of these games. So there was already like this interesting antagonistic thing between the game, the protagonist, and the player. But I never, at that point, had it in my head that making games was a thing, that this was a career I could think about or a useful ambition that I could have. And so I went off and did some other stuff. The first signing, which I didn't pick up on either, when I was at college, was when I first discovered the internet. And this was late 90s. This would have been kind of 98, 99. So like the internet was the very low crap version of the internet. And most of the people on the internet were in universities or, had a reason to be on the internet. And one of the things I discovered there was like the speed was so slow. If you wanted to download a game off the internet, you'd have to leave leave the computer running for 48 hours or something. But
Yeah.
the kind of text adventure games could be downloaded very quickly. And this community kind of grew up that was a bunch of people similar to me. So mostly people who were in colleges, and we all had like this nostalgia for the classic text games. We'd kind of grown up on those, and people had created these tools that would allow you to go and make your own interactive fiction games in that mold. But because we were all young, excited people, we were not only being nostalgic, but we were trying to do cool stuff. So there was lots of people trying to explore what does it mean to tell an interactive story. People like Adam Cardre, Andrew Plotkin, Emily Short, and a whole bunch of other people doing really, really interesting things with storytelling. And because these things were text, and because we were doing it for fun, you didn't have like the restrictions that, if you were trying to tell an interesting story back then in a proper video game, it was with very low poly characters, and it wouldn't work.
Right.
So there's lots of kind of fun interactive story stuff going on. And notably, I released this game there called Isle, which was a text adventure that opens in a grocery store in the pasta aisle. And the character that you're controlling notices some gnocchi, and it reminds him of a holiday he had in Rome. And then you're given the prompt of like, tell the character what to do. And the trick with Isle was you could pretty much type anything and the game would understand it, which was quite rare. But having understood it, it would basically finish the story for you. So you got one move and then it would reset. So you had this kind of very broad Groundhog Day thing where you just try shit and then restart, try different things. But through doing these loops, you would pick up on stuff. So a lot of things you could do would introduce the idea of a character called Claire that this character lived with. So then you might on another turn be like, oh, go find Claire or call out to Claire or remember Claire and stuff. So you would kind of build up this idea of the story and the backstory through these kind of little Groundhog Day loops. But it was a very, one of the confusing things about it was not all of the stories existed in the same universe. So it was this very kind of sculptural, cubist way of telling a story, but kind of fun. Partly I made it because I was frustrated that when you played those games, the first thing you do is sit down and type dumb stuff. And say, like, if there's ever,
reminds
like,
me it reminds me of like those websites now where you kind of just mess around with words and it like it's a computer is telling this story based on the 5 words you gave it and stuff like that, like those randomly generated stories that on these websites. And it's like back when you were doing it, you were actually trying to thread a cohesive storytelling device there. That's pretty fascinating that you were able to do that so early on.
Yeah, no, and it was like I say, it came from this place where, like, at this time, people were making these incredibly clever stories. Like there was one of the early ones. There was a game called So Far by Andrew Plotkin, which was about this failed relationship, and I remember people would compare it to Ingmar Bergman's movies, and it was very thematically rich. But even playing that, the first thing you would do loading this thing up would be like kill myself. You'd meet a character, you'd like try kissing the character, punch the character. You kind of part of your instinct playing those old text games was to figure out how thoroughly they had been implemented, how much detail was in the implementation. You would like test the simulation by doing dumb stuff, which you still do today, right? If you boot up Zelda and you're supposed to be saving the world and you start running around throwing pots at stuff and all that kind of dumb video
kicking
game
chickens.
Yeah. So I remember being like, it annoyed me that people had to kind of facilitate that when writing these things, but it also annoyed me because I knew I did it. Like I'm there, like I want to be fully immersed. I want suspension of disbelief. I want to dig these deep themes, but I'm still there typing the dumb stuff. Remove all clothes, like in a scene where I should not be removing all clothes. So that was the spark for Isle, was like, okay, I'm going to put you in the most boring place. I'm going to put you in a grocery store. And if you start climbing shelves, if you start throwing food, if you start attacking the woman that's further down the aisle, then rather than giving you a witty answer in that kind of LucasArts style, I'm going to go, okay, let's do that story. So often, so a lot of the stories generated in that game were dark stories, because it's like, why is this man stripping naked in the grocery store? Why is he attacking this woman who's pushing her trolley further down? But yeah, so I did that, and that, like, people loved that, and it kind of created a mini genre of this idea of kind of one move games. But having done that, I went off and I got a job and wasn't really thinking that I should go into video games. And then a few years later, after various misadventures in the .com world, found myself back in England looking for a job, and for a video game company. And he was like, well, hey, dude, you do art? Which I did. I used to do painting and stuff. So he was like, why didn't you become a video game artist? So I had like this mad week where I downloaded cracked versions of Maya and 3D Studio and all the software and put together a portfolio, which luckily this was like just before everything on the internet was archived. So there is no evidence of this portfolio anywhere on the internet.
Oh boy.
Because it was like, oh, here are some character concepts for an RPG. Here is, but it was weird. There was some weird stuff in there. And through that, I got a job as an artist. And that was on Serious Sam for the GameCube. But very rapidly, I transitioned to design because I wouldn't shut up in all the meetings. And then very rapidly after that, got promoted to lead designer because I still wouldn't shut up. They're like, maybe if we give him more power, he will calm down.
He'll just stop talking.
And yeah, it was, and at that point, I was that was working on a lot of games that, were licensed properties, were objectively not great games. But, those teams are great places for people to develop skills and work together, because you usually have less time and less money, and the best you can. And so you get to play around and learn stuff. And it was through making those games we ultimately ended up getting to do the Silent Hill stuff, which was kind of the point where I looked back and was like, oh yeah, I've always been interested in doing these weird story things, and then I did that weird story thing. There was a text thing, and now I'm doing this, and I'm trying out these ideas, and I guess this is what I've always wanted to do on some level, and have somehow ended up doing it. Cool.
So the whole
stuck
Silent
on-
Hill thing. I'm sorry, Andy. I just want to make sure that
Sure.
you know Andy is the Silent Hill guy. So when we start talking about Silent Hill, he's gonna drive this ship. I just wanted to let you know that because he's a huge fan of Silent Hill. With that being said, Andy, you can now take it away.
No, I was gonna
apologize.
say I'm still stuck on you making games about your friend getting laid, which sounds like you invented Leisure Suit Larry.
Well, I think what you have to realize is a lot seen back then, and we didn't have, like, me and my friends didn't have the 16-bit computers, which I think was like the Amiga and the Atari were starting to show up. But we were kids, you couldn't afford to buy games, so you would pirate all of your games, and the pirated games would be distributed on discs that would have like 3 or 4 games on them. And they would have like a little bit of demo scene stuff as well. So there'd be some cool music and visuals. But because these were generally between young men, they were also full of semi-pornographic things. So there was like a whole general black market of stuff like Leisure Suit Larry, right? Which I guess, and in fact, Leisure Suit Larry was, I believe, originally there was a thing called Soft Porn Adventure, which was a text game that Sierra adapted into
correct.
Leisure Suit
Yes.
Larry. So
Yes.
there's always been that shadowy world of weird sex games, and these were not as pornographic because none of us were getting laid. So our experience there was not extensive anyway. But like it was, that whole jokey, the thing that I was pissed off with Isle, but like that jokiness that you see in LucasArts, you see in a lot of those early text games, where you were trying to tell a story in a game because you were always butting up against the system, because it didn't always work the way it should.
Right.
Comedy was always the fallback. Like the reason those LucasArts games work so much better than a lot of other games is because the humor allowed you to just get away with some of the sillier, more elaborate puzzles, right? And it allowed you, if stuff didn't work, for you to not care as much. It wasn't going to suddenly puncture the drama or the atmosphere or whatever. So it was great. All that stuff was kind of in the spirit, but there would usually be quests. I don't think I have any of these anymore. I should try and find them, but there would usually, like Leisure Suit Larry, there would be a girl or some event or something would be the quest, and you'd have to collect the stuff you needed to proceed to the quest, and then there would be a series of humiliating reversals as you went through that.
So you have it's a very brief, a very diverse library of games you've worked on during your career. How does a guy who worked on a game called Crusty Demons,
This
and
was classic.
yes, of course, and,
IGN Xbox's Game of the Month. I'll just remind people. But the key thing there is that the Xbox 360 already existed at that point.
right.
So the fact that we were IGN Xbox's Game of the Month was there weren't many to choose from.
And also, you worked on a Ghost Rider game.
My first brush with Hollywood. I was working on that one.
How does that person get to write an origin story for one of the most iconic horror game franchises ever?
So this is the horrific reality that I guess Silent Hill fans maybe already have a sense of now, especially in 2019. But Konami as a publisher is not entirely on the ball when it comes to
Protecting its franchises.
what even like
making wise decisions.
Silent Hill was one of the things they made, and you think like the original Silent Hill, that was the not even the C team, right? That was the D team. That was in Japanese corporate culture, you don't get rid of people people, you just move them around. And like at that point, like the Silent Hill team were these people that didn't necessarily fit in the other projects and kind of just got left to make this weird thing, and it ended up being amazing. But by the time I came along, basically Konami had given up on Silent Hill. So they'd done Silent Hill 3. I think 2 and 3 had not sold great. I think 2 much better because it was the first on that generation. So they'd given up after Silent Hill 3. And the team went off, or a version of the team went off to make The Room, which was going to be a new franchise. Mm-hmm. And at some point they went, maybe we should stick with the existing franchise. That's going to be easier, right? So they went through that process of bringing The Room back to be a Silent Hill game. Released that, it did even worse. So at that point, they were like, we're done with these things. And there were a few weird little spin-offy things, but essentially they were done with the franchise. And then along came Hollywood with the movie adaptation. And knowing a big movie was coming out, Konami America, who are wholly in many ways separate from Konami Japan, were like, we should be doing something with this, right? There's going to be the first good video game movie, and it's based on one of our key IPs. We've got to do something with this. And I think by the time they figured that out, there wasn't time to do anything. And at the time, the PSP, the Sony PSP, was a big deal for Sony, and they wanted to do something on that. And the thing that they figured out was the only thing they could make in time was they did this thing where they got all of the Silent Hill comics, the game trailers and making of movies and artwork, and stuck it all on a UMD and released that, called the Silent Hill Collection or something.
Experience, yes. And I sadly owned that UMD.
Yeah, so they did that. And the guy that was producing that was not in any way like the Silent Hill guy. He was just a guy who produced that. And obviously to produce that UMD, you don't necessarily need to be, the world's ultimate video game producer. And once they'd done that, they said, well, we should make a proper game to try and cash in on the interest. And I believe, and a lot of this is stuff I heard, several steps removed, but I believe they were initially excited to do a remake of Silent Hill 1 for the PSP. And at some point they were involved in doing this with the LA office of the company I worked for. Because everyone in Konami US, which was based in LA, like they knew, they were all part of that scene and knew each other. So at some point they cooked up that they should make a game together. Despite that particular company and that particular office not having any pedigree in the horror space or any relevant spaces. And I think the version I was told was that they realized that a remake of Silent Hill 1 would be too expensive. So instead they would do a prequel, which didn't completely make sense to me. And at this point, I would say if anyone ever said to me, should they make a prequel to Silent Hill 1, I would have immediately said no, because having played that game a few times, I was like, the entire backstory is explained in Silent Hill 1. Like, it's literally, that's the game, is walking around, figuring out what the hell happened, and you even have literal flashbacks that kind of explain it, right? So anyone that has finished or thoroughly explored Silent Hill 1 is like, oh, this is what happened. 7 years ago, these events occurred, and now we're in this position. So there wasn't a whole lot of prequeling to be done, right? It's not like I don't know if they're still doing this terrible idea, but they're doing like a Die Hard prequel, right? Which at least, I mean, that makes no sense to me, but at least there you can say that character of John McClane was a cop before all, like, has a life before this, and we can maybe somehow do something with that. But with Silent Hill, it was like you're talking about a child, and pretty much the flashback summed up what was done to that child. But they decided to do this prequel, and they started working on it. And I'm telling you the long version of this.
I'm loving every second of it.
But at some point, that team had very little to show. They were actually working, I believe, with an internal engine which was not entirely operational. And my team...
There was a game called Original Sin. It was pitched as, I think, to begin with, and it looked dreadful from what they had first shown. Like this weird over-the-shoulder kind of camera.
So we haven't got there yet. We're still...
Oh, yeah, okay.
No, so there were design docs and stuff, but they didn't have... I think they, literally, they maybe had some 3D models, but they didn't have anything to show of an actual game.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, my team was doing Ghost Rider, which is its whole other thing. There's lots of interesting stories around that, and how Majesco helped create Bioshock in a very loose way.
Oh, wow.
Through the series deals that the Ghost Rider was involved in. But we had a character-based game engine, and it was running on PSP because we were doing a PSP version of Ghost Rider. And so that team flew out to the UK and spent a week with us, I believe. Or maybe they didn't even come out. No, they must have come out. But basically, my team took a week out to put together a Silent Hill demo using our tech. And that demo was very traditional Silent Hill. I think it was, there were the camera angles. It was a big rusty building. And there was a little bit of combat, which maybe it went to an over the shoulder, because that was kind of the thing they wanted to get to, I think. But I think it was probably pretty traditional Silent Hill. And so we put this demo together in a week, and it looked pretty good. Like one of our coders was this genius coder who was amazing at lighting and stuff. So he was like, "Oh, Silent Hill is famous for its lighting and the shadows and the flashlight. I can do that on a PSP despite it being smaller hardware." So he had programmed some of that, and it looked great. So we gave that to them. They went off, and we continued to make our game whilst, from across the ocean being like, how come those guys get to make Silent Hill? So unfair. And despite having come off of Crusty Demons and making Ghost Rider, like I was the hardcore narrative guy that was really into this shit. And the lead artist I was working with was really into this shit, loved Silent Hill, was obsessed with it. And we loved our psychological horror. We loved our dark shit.
My kind of guy.
So, yeah, we would like, damn them. But anyway, they went off. And then I believe like X months later, they were still in trouble because they hadn't really taken what we'd done any further. And I think that was the demo you've probably seen, where they were, the producer at Konami, who was, if you remember, he was a UMD producer guy, had now become essentially the de facto Silent Hill guy. And he was like, well, you need to make it look like Resident Evil 4 because that is what horror games need to look like now.
Oh, God.
So they had tried to make it look like Resident Evil 4, but on a PSP controller, and the Resident Evil 4, as much as they tried to make it work in Resident Evil 2, like, is not as suited to the kind of corridor-based thing of Silent Hill and the sheer number of doors that must be checked and explored. And so they had this demo, which, I think was shown publicly. There is like video of it online where the trucker character's walking around and there are these purple zombie things.
Yep, that's the one.
Doing like a dance routine or something. And it was really bad. And not only was that bad, but the stuff that wasn't shown when we saw it was the stuff that really scared me and Neil, the lead artist, because here was a prequel story. And we had questions of who is this trucker character anyway. But this prequel story did wonderful things. So this was set 7 years prior to Silent Hill 1, at the point where Alessa is taken away. But in their game, Alessa was a teenager with a big bosom.
What?
Kaufman, who in the original game, I believe, sees these things for the first time and is dealing with it, in this was fully cognizant of the supernatural. And you came across him dissecting a zombie corpse and talking about quantum theory and other dimensions.
Oh my God.
And he looked
What?
about 60. He looked like he was 60. And we're like, in Silent Hill 1, he looks like Bill Pullman from Lost Highway. How is 7 years prior he looking like this weird old mad scientist guy? And there was a lot of other stuff. So tonally, we were like, this is insane. This is so wrong. And even tiny things like the Flauros device is a tetrahedron, whatever shape it is.
Sure, yeah.
But their version was a pyramid. So it had it was just the wrong shape. And it was just little things like that. It's Silent Hill. You cannot fuck with this stuff. You can't. And so we were, having had a glimpse of this thing and hearing that it was still in trouble, we were saying, what the hell's going on? And I remember we kind of angrily went to the main boss and were like, this is wrong. This is not Silent Hill. This is more like Evil Dead. The whole tone of it is. And he was like, yes, that's what Konami wants. And he said he had been told the tone was of a dark comedy, like the TV show Scrubs.
Oh my God. How do you get a franchise so wrong? It's like,
and so we were like,
and
we were like, come, just to educate you, have you seen the movie Jacob's Ladder? That's Silent Hill, right?
Yes.
That's the thing. It's not this. And at some point, I think we had complained enough, and I think everyone was getting nervous enough now that people at Konami were starting to realize this was not great. And at some point, they were like, okay, your team can take this project over, but you only have the money and time that is left. So you don't get the whole budget. You've got, it was like a matter of months to do this thing. And so the cool thing about that for us was everyone was so worried and so nervous, and the producer knew that this needed to be fixed and was terrified. That I got to walk in and go, hey, I've written some cool stuff before. I will write this. And no one questioned it, right? If we'd gone in pitching, let's make a new Silent Hill game for you, Konami, they might, you think, maybe ask some questions. But that didn't happen. But we had this process where, despite having given it to us because it was so bad, the bosses at that point were then like, look, you've got very little time and money, just finish this thing. Like ship it so that no one gets sued. Make it as good as you can, but you've got to just finish this thing. I know you don't like what they've done, but just finish it. And we were like, we can't do this. This, you can't do this to the franchise. This will be the first non-Japanese Silent Hill. And that was we were like, our goal is to make a mediocre Silent Hill game. I think internally we were like, our worst level cannot be worse than the worst level in all the other Silent Hill games. And it would be great if our best level, sat up with some of the good Silent Hill levels. We were not trying to make a good game. We knew that we had our work cut out. And in that first week we had on the project, we looked at it and we threw out all the enemy designs, all the story, all the levels. And we wanted to throw out the main character, but we weren't allowed to because he had already been in promotional materials. And importantly, they had almost finished the CGI outro. And they said, we've spent money on these, so you can't change them.
Holy shit.
So we were locked into this trucker arrives in town, and we were locked into a giant beastie fight at the end. But what we did was we heavily cut those and we added some voiceover and did some weird stuff. But and then the trucker character, we were like, how is this guy we've never heard of at the heart of Silent Hill? Like, how is he the root of everything? And who he is anyway? And they were like, oh, he's a middle-class trucker. That's interesting. And we were like, how is he a middle-class trucker? He's a trucker. Like, and they're like, no, he's a middle-class trucker.
Interesting. Let's go.
There's 3 million of those in this country.
Yeah. So I was like, right, we need to redo the story as it was. Like the version we inherited was just a hunt for magic triangles to make the pyramid that isn't actually a pyramid. And we were like, there has to at least be like a reason why he's going to these places, why he's in Silent Hill. Like there has to be something. And so I rewrote the story in like a week. But then they said, well, we don't have time to storyboard it and we have to do all the final motion capture in a month. So you can't do that. And so then I would go home and I was like, okay, I went home and I storyboarded it all myself. And then similarly with the monsters, it was like, we need completely new creature designs because like they had like a demon bellhop and just weird monsters.
Classic Silent Hill designs right there.
And again, it was like, well, we don't have time to get these fully concepted and stuff. So I would go home, did very little sleeping at this point, and drew the characters, the monster designs myself, brought them in. We just kind of got stuck in and did the best that we could. And, you know, remember the most contentious thing for us and probably for the rest of the world was the character referred to as the Butcher, who was essentially Pyramid Head.
Right.
And when we looked at it, we were like, why is this Pyramid Head character in there? And they were like, oh, because we're telling the origin story of Pyramid Head.
Oh, I want to kill myself.
And there's a script. I have the script.
So bad.
I've been very good at never leaking any of this stuff. Every now and then you're like, someone's like, oh my God, Origin sucks. I'm like, oh,
you have no idea
how
much worse. And I think the great irony here, Sam, is you went on to make one of the most competent post-Team Silent Hill games ever created. That and Shattered Memories stack up well against the franchise previous entries like Homecoming, Downpour, Book of Memories, just dreadful games. And you had so many limitations and you still didn't make absolute shit somehow.
Yeah, well, like I said, the goal was let's not make. I mean, it's easy when you set yourself that goal of let's not make absolute shit. You're like we've got to do better than that. And but yeah, I remember the Pyramid Head thing was another one where we were like, this doesn't make any sense. And the origin story they had was that he was a fry cook who was a cannibal who started just attaching metal to his head. And there was like a scene where he had the dialogue was something like, I likes it when the eyes pop out. No, I likes eating the eyes. They pop it. It was just like this kind of very Texas Chainsaw Massacre cannibal comedy thing. And we were like, well, that's gone. We're like that. Like you. No,
this is unreal to me.
Like the origin story of Pyramid Head is he's this weird ass abstract fucking thing that is brought into being by James's various Freudian things.
Right.
And they were like,
so
well,
cerebral.
So we were like, you can't do this thing. And they were like, well, and again, we have put out promotional artwork with this character in, so he's staying. And also, we put Pyramid Head in the movie, so And we were like, yeah, but it was cool, but it still upset some people. And this is the gamers. Anyway, we had to keep him in. So we did our best. And this was, I remember it was like a political negotiation, like with Konami of like, we're like, what's the least we can get away with? I think at this point, maybe at this point, I think like the person inside Konami who also cared about that was like Tom Hullett, who became more of a visible face of Silent Hill in those later years. But at that point, I think
punching bag in the later
he
years.
was not. I don't remember him as being
The
like
fans
on the
did not like
project
him
at
at
that
all.
point. We were mainly dealing with this other producer, but we were negotiating. He will turn up and he'll stab some people and he'll look like this, but we have to acknowledge that he happens to look a hell of a lot like Pyramid Head, but in a way that doesn't, like, we have to like hold our hands up to like, clearly this thing is Pyramid Head, but it's not. So I think we had one of the things we added was we added this theater level, and the version we took over it might have been a theater. It was either, I think they had a level that was called the theater, or at least on paper. But the play that was being shown there was Hamlet, and I think the ideas they had were all very camp theatrical, and it wasn't scary or anything. And I was like, well, down with Shakespeare, let's do The Tempest, because that's essentially Silent Hill. I'm like, The Tempest is these people rock up in this weird ass isolated community and all this stuff happens and it's cool and interesting. And I think we had it that various things went wrong with this production. And I think we had like the costume designer or something had seen, maybe we deliberately referenced the Historical Society, but because there was like the painting in Silent Hill 2, we maybe referenced that he had seen a painting and had these visions and he was drawing this character and it drove him mad or something. But we like had some tiny one note somewhere that kind of referenced this thing, but we had to keep that in there. And we really didn't want to. We really didn't want to have that character in there because it just was silly. But yeah, middle class trucker and Pyramid Head knockoff were the two things where it's like you have to have those.
As a fry cook, I still can't get over that. I mean, at least they could have gone like, oh, he's like some Egyptologist who fell, in a sarcophagus, and now
he was a math teacher. He was a math teacher who was obsessed with the purity of triangles. Yeah, no, it was. But like I said, the tone of the version we took over was very Evil Dead. It was dark and gory and weird, but also a bit funny. And the character of the middle class trucker was wisecracking. He was this wisecracking guy in plaid, walking around beating up zombies. So it's pretty different.
So given how stressful it was to get this game out the door, why would you come back and work on a second game in the franchise years later?
I mean, that question implies I had a choice. At this point, I had worked on Crossy Demons of Dirt, Nicolas Cage's Ghost Rider, right? No, I mean, it was incredibly hard work, but it was fun. Like, yes, it was a horrible burden to be given, but also we were getting to make a Silent Hill game, right? And actually Origins was in some ways pleasant because when we looked at how little time we had, when we looked what they had done, we said we can only make this if we make a Silent Hill 1 game. Like, we're not, they were trying to do or being encouraged to make the same move forward that Resident Evil 4 had. Like, you'd just seen the Silent Hill, the survival horror template reinvented. And so, it's like we should continue to do all these clever things. But we were like, the only way we can make this game is if it's exactly the same gameplay as Silent Hill 1. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. It is fixed cameras. It is locked doors. You'll spend half your time looking at the map, figuring out which door you haven't clicked on yet, right? There will be cryptic puzzles. There will be shifting back and forth. And I think if I remember correctly, Konami were like, well, you have to have at least one innovation. And hey, breakable weapons are cool.
Oh yeah, so cool.
So
Gotta have
we had
those.
breakable weapons.
Everyone loves those.
And we had the slight twist on the two worlds because you could shift through the mirrors, which was a fresh take, because I think all the games prior to that, you basically shifted between the worlds when you were told to.
Right.
You weren't necessarily in control of it. But it was fun in that, like, again, as someone that's interested in doing things with narrative, and Shattered Memories had a lot of those ideas in. Here it was like, no, there's going to be notes, and you're going to rock up at this level, which will have its own kind of story, and you'll get there, and the notes will be in non-linear order, but in a way that tells the story in an interesting way. So, Travis shows up at the asylum where his mother was. The last note you're going to read is the note of the day she arrived, with this hopeful, like the doctor saying he's looking forward to helping her with her problems or whatever. Like, that, knowing that you have that template and you're not trying to innovate or find a clever way to do these things is kind of freeing in some ways, because you're like, oh, cool, we'll just have some fun with this. And we got to make some cool monsters, and I think at that point we made the biggest monster that Silent Hill had. We had the big Caliban things stalking the streets.
That four-legged thing that would, with its ass upended, would follow you around.
It was based on Russian contortionists and some other weird stuff. I remember working. I was an idiot. Working on that game, I would go home to do my image research, because I didn't want to be doing certain image searches on the company computers. So I'd go and do them on my home computer instead. And I guess if anyone ever pulled me up, if the police came knocking, I'd be like, oh, it was research for a video game.
I mean, you're on
Contortionist is
for sure.
Oh yeah. Contortionist is a tricky keyword.
Contortionist is okay.
Yeah.
It was Travis's mother.
Also, I imagine.
Travis's mother, there was a lot of BDSM asphyxiation stuff we were pulling up for her, and all sorts of interesting. If you're looking for visual reference for Silent Hill monsters, it's a fun place. But yeah, so it was. So we did Origins, and I think we hit our stated goal of like, mate, just this can't be an utter embarrassment. And the things we couldn't change. Like the silliness of just attempting a prequel in the first place. The trucker character and Pyramid Head, we did what we could. And I think the only character, and I remember from memories on the forums and stuff, like I think some people liked what we did, some people didn't. But the only character, when we looked at it, we were like, the only character that is interesting in a prequel sense was Lisa the nurse, which amusingly was the only character not featured in their version of the game. They were like, oh, you get this glimpse of what she'd become and what had happened to her in Silent Hill 1, and she's so cool, all those little cutscenes. It was like, oh, it would be interesting to see her back slightly before all that stuff happened to her.
I love how the intro of Silent Hill 1 kind of tells a story before the game's events. You can pull so much information from that 2-minute CG cutscene, and these people did not take any of that.
Well, that was my thing. I was like, the purest, most beautiful thing. Because I think at that point, like, my opinion on the franchise was Silent Hill 2 is the best. Silent Hill 1 as a game is much better. But also those cutscenes I thought were little beautiful gems.
Stunning.
Like, they were such a labor of love. And for that time and place, amazing. But yeah, in that opening montage, it was almost like the kind of 80s TV shows that would have like, this is the entire story of the TV show.
Right.
In the opening titles. So you don't have to get, that's the setup, and then we're going to do some cool episodic thing with it. And I guess it was probably a product of it being this tiny team, and he's just knocking out these little bits and pieces that maybe don't end up being used or whatever, and so he gets to squish them all together. But yeah, no, there's lots of things about Silent Hill 1 that are cool by virtue of that technology, that age, that that game being, just the graphical technology makes it look slightly more interesting and abstract and weird, and the fog stuff and the snow, it all adds up to something interesting. But Lisa was the only one where we were like, we can see the living Lisa walk around and get a sense of her full of life before the bad stuff. But they're done with that, but at least we can touch on that. So we had, like I say, it was, I had every game I'd made at that point had been a struggle and had weird stuff around it. And, the Ghost Rider game, when we came, it was because we had a sister studio that did really good motorbike games. They did like the MotoGP series. So Majesco, who at that point had a ton of cash from doing the Pokemon cartoons on Game Boy cartridges, was a thing that they got the license for. So they had a ton of cash, and they went,
did.
"Oh my god!"
They were like, "We're going to take this cash, and we're going to become the next EA or whatever." So they bought a bunch of games, and they bought the rights to Ghost Rider, which at that point was going to be the big Sony blockbuster movie. They got The Darkness, which ended up being a great game. And then they got the Advent Rising trilogy, which was an Orson Scott card-penned Halo wannabe thing, at least in their pitch.
Game was good, but oh man.
And we got the Ghost Rider game because of the biking expertise. And when they said to me, you're going to be the lead designer on this Ghost Rider thing, I was like, oh, can we skip the bike bits? Because they're going to be painful, and then just focus on the cool punching and hitting things. And they were like, well, no, because you're the bike guys. You have to do that. And at some point, Majesco ran out of Game Boy money. And so they packaged these things up. They couldn't, I don't think maybe they did sell Advent Rising, but it was like one of those subprime mortgage deals. Ghost Rider and The Darkness got packaged together and sold to 2K games. And the week after that deal went ahead, Sony and Marvel announced that Ghost Rider was being moved from the summer blockbuster slot to be the February movie. And February was not a time that people brought out cool superhero movies.
Nope, that's where films go to die.
So suddenly 2K were like, oh my God. And all of our cool cutscenes got turned into comic book style cutscenes. And the game got massively constrained. So like everything I've been working on, and we won't even get into Crusty Demons of Dirt, but like everything I'd worked on, like that team got put on notice like 3 or 4 times. Like that game, the fact that game ever came out is a miracle. So working on a problem Silent Hill game was just like working on the problem games I'd worked on before, except it was Silent Hill. So it was a cool thing. And so after that, we went and I can't get my chronology right. I think after that, we went and worked on another game, which was another problem project. It was a German RPG being made in Bratislava, and it was about elves called Elvian. And the team there is somewhat similar. Like they had some great artwork and tons of ideas, and had written a novel and could speak Elvish, but the game was not really present. And we came in and rebooted it, and I rewrote the story, and we did a bunch of things, and then that eventually got cancelled. And during all of this, we were talking to Konami about doing something else, and there were a series of conversations where they wanted us to make another PSP game. We were pitching them a Wii game, and the first hint of Shattered Memories was this producer who had done the UMD, who had done Origins, who was, let's say, he was a bit of a maverick, had once told me over drinks that like he really wanted to do a game about Brahms PD, right, which was the neighboring police force and the characters.
Right. Yeah.
from them. He was like, I wanted to, his head make it more mainstream. Let's have this police theme in Silent Hill. So Brahms PD was the name. He was like, I have this idea of doing this Brahms PD spin-off. So I went away and I was like, I have all these cool ideas of things we could do. And I had this idea that I wanted to have the framing of a psychiatrist and this kind of unreliable narration aspect to it. And I wanted this game that would actually do the kind of the dynamic narrative would be based in some ways on the idea of the psychology and on more subtle things. And I was like a big fan of first person games. So I think that was his idea of Brahms PD, that it would be a first person shooter. So I wrote up this idea, called it Brahms PD, and showed it to him, thinking like, I'm being really sly here. By making it look like I'm riffing on his idea, I'm getting to sneak all this cool stuff in. And he looked at me, he was like, no, Brahms PD is a straight up shooter. Like the thing I had in my head, it was just a shooter. Like that's why it would be mainstream and popular. And this is all far too cerebral, whatever. But we then continued to riff on these ideas and put together this idea of a Wii Silent Hill game. And Wii at that point was really big. So publishers were getting excited. And we kind of evolved all these ideas. So we still had the psychiatrist, but we had the flashlight and things. It was more Silent Hilly.
This was Cold Heart, correct?
This was called Cold Heart. It's still their behest had combat in it because they thought that swinging a pipe with the Wii was really cool. But this then went away, like it didn't necessarily go anywhere. I believe, and again, this is my chronology. I believe there is a demo that did the rounds for Wii, I guess, for another developer's project called Winter or something that was like featured by IGN as this cool lost horror game or something. Mm-hmm. That seemed very Silent Hilly. And I believe that was certainly and I think timing wise, from my perspective, and this might not be true, it seemed like we had put together this pitch and then Konami went and did a demo of this pitch with a different developer that developer then took away and did another thing with. But it could all have, who knows?
That seems highly suspect, though.
Yeah. And then at some point, Konami came back, and I think Sony were really keen for them to do another PSP game. And so they came back to us and said, please do another PSP Silent Hill game. Because you've done one, you could do another one. And to his credit, like the head of our studio, I think was like, I don't know if we want to. He's like, that was a 78 Metacritic, and that Metacritic is everything. He's like, I don't know what is in it for us breaking our balls to go make another 7 out of 10 game, because people called out that Origins was very traditional in its design, somewhat tired, right? Why would we want to go and do another of those? Because there wasn't a big upside for us. And I think on this conversation, the Maverick producer threw in, well, hey, what if we did a PSP for us and did the cool Wii game you want to do for you? Like, let's do, if you do this thing that we want, you can have the cool thing you want to do. And so we set off to make 2 Silent Hill games, a PSP game that was essentially Origins 2, although not necessarily in any way connected to the story-wise, and then the Wii game, Cold Heart. And not long into developing those, somebody at Konami went, why are we making 2 games again?
Oh, no.
Why don't we just make 1 game on all 3 platforms? That would be a lot easier, right? And so they kind of got merged. And I don't know if this happened before or after. The final key element for Shattered Memories was, again, this is my remembering of it, but like Konami Japan, Konami America, Konami Europe were these separate companies. I think in effect, Konami of America was licensing Silent Hill from Konami of Japan in order to make these games. So it was very convoluted. But the powers that be back in Japan, I believe, had like a central database of what projects had been greenlit and their status, whatever. And if your project was greenlit in this system, then you could just get on with making the thing and account for it and everything. And because of those original questions around doing a Silent Hill 1 remake back before Origins, apparently the idea of a remake had already been greenlit and was essentially a live project in the system, although no one was making it. So what was suggested by the producer was, if we call this a Silent Hill 1 remake, it's already been greenlit. We don't have to ask anyone. We can just get on with it. So we went, okay, that's what we're going to do. So it then became a Silent Hill 1 remake. But immediately everyone looked at it and said, look, we've had the movie, and the movie was a pretty decent attempt to, iron out some of the dialogue and try and make a modern interpretation of Silent Hill 1. We've done Origins, which was the same character, story, setting as Silent Hill 1. Silent Hill 3 has kind of revisited and remixed a lot of this stuff. Like, there is zero creative space. How could we do a straight remake of Silent Hill 1 in a way that was interesting, given these constraints? So everyone agreed that didn't make any sense. So that's when I was like, well, what if we do something more radical? And I think at that time, I hadn't actually watched it. All-Star Galactica was a big thing, which, was a reboot of the old TV show and, used the general concept and some character names, but otherwise kind of massively remixed that show and took it in a different direction. And everyone was loving that show. So I was like, we'll do that. And so that was kind of the idea, was we're going to do all these cool things we've been figuring out for the Wii, which involved like this framing device of the psychiatrist and the various control things we wanted to do, and this dynamic story elements. And the heads of Konami have been told this is a remake, but we know that we want to do something interesting with that. And from my perspective, like, we already had some of the ideas in Cold Heart were around this story that was to do with memories and this unreliable narrator and kind of childhood and nostalgia and things. And so I was like, wouldn't it be really neat if the game itself is a mindfuck for Silent Hill fans, because it's retreading their experience of Silent Hill 1, but in a way where everything is not quite the same. And it's kind of, everything is upended and twisted and strange. And that was kind of how we got stuck in. But yeah, at that point, I was super excited because a lot of these silly contractual business things had meant that I actually had a decent amount of time on my own to plan out Shattered Memories. Like, normally, especially on all these problem projects, you're just running full tilt trying to make the game whilst everyone is building everything and it's all happening at once. But with Shattered Memories, I had like a good stretch where I sketched out the entire game and got to interrogate that and make sense of it and be like, if we want to end up with this cool reveal, we need to set that up across this, and we need to make sure all these things are baked in. And like, we set ourselves, because we were so frustrated with how arbitrary some of the stuff in Origins was, we were like, every puzzle, every location, everything in this game has to in some way tie into the story. Like, there's nothing gratuitous in here. Every we even set ourselves the technical challenge of like, every poster sign thing in the game is readable and can be looked at, and those will not be randomly created by a level artist. Those will come through the design team and the writing, and like, let's make everything cohesive. But a lot of that came out of the fact that I had the chance to sit down and properly kind of plan this thing out. So yeah, getting to work on that project was a huge deal. Like I say, that was really the moment where I sat down and went, oh, cool. I am writing and kind of directing this cool narrative video game. It feels good. And it feels like this was the place I would have wanted to go if I knew it was the thing.
And I want to say also, it was some of the most haunting endings since Silent Hill 2 in Shattered Memories. I always say that's one of my favorite games in the franchise. It's so the whole, from the psych profile to the frozen other world and the lack of real combat. It's a really fresh experience, and I really wish that they hadn't abandoned the IP the way Konami has, because nowadays we have things like Pachinko to look forward to when it comes to the Silent Hill franchise.
Yeah, and like the combat was a funny thing, because that was like when we were doing Origins, so we were trying to break down like how the games worked. And like I say, I would look at Silent Hill 1, and I was like, this is a decent survival horror game, whereas with 2, like, it was accepted amongst fans that like, oh, you can just run past the enemies. Like, yeah, it's not really about that. Like, it's about all the other cool shit. Just run past the enemies. And it always felt, I was like, well, that's like step 1. Step 2 is if you can just run past them because they're just there as a thing. Like, step 2 is to question why they're even there in the first place. And I think for me, I've always been frustrated by how slowly video games themselves evolve and how some of the genres evolve very slowly. And for me, if you look at survival horror, you have like the foundational things, like you have Alone in the Dark, which is, a Lovecraftian game. So it makes sense that everything is diary entries and is obscure, weird puzzles, because that kind of fits. And then you have Resident Evil comes along and takes the Romero zombies. So then, all the health kits and ammunition and headshots and all that stuff makes sense. The fact that you have slow moving zombie enemies that, are dangerous if they get to you, but you have that whole setup. It's like that is straight from the Romero zombie movies, makes sense. And it was always weird to me that you'd look at Silent Hill, which, is a psychological horror thing. Like it takes a lot from things like Jacob's Ladder. And it was weird to me that those games still had this survival element of health packs, guns, shooting lots of dumb enemies. Like, and the conversation we had was, if this was a movie, like the action element would not be this. Like that, yeah, in Evil Dead, sure. In a Romero zombie film, sure, people are going to be running around,
right? But it would overshadow the thought-provoking aspect.
But and so we look at them, like in most supernatural horror movies, the action element is things being, generally the protagonist is running, screaming. They're not often fighting with these things. Slasher movies, the whole structure of those is, daytime, everything's cool. We're going to get some exposition. Then the night falls, you start getting worried. And then suddenly everyone leaves the sorority and then there's just one cheerleader left. And now you're like, okay, I'm tense as hell because something bad's going to happen. And it builds and builds and builds. And then out comes the slasher. And then there's like the chase, which is the pure fear and adrenaline and horror. And then the person gets stabbed to death. And then the body's found the next day, and you kind of repeat the cycle. But there's this beautiful kind of building up and releasing of tension. And we were looking at all these examples, and we were like, yeah, if you came in now and said from scratch, we're going to invent a horror video game, you would probably have the chase, the nightmare. You would have this structure. Like that would be the thing you would build it around. So we wanted to do that. And that was something we weren't allowed to do, and the producer was keen for us to still have combat in there and be swinging pipes. And then that Maverick producer got let go one day. And the second we found out about this happening, we went in and changed all the design documents. So the next day when the new producer started, he was like, "Oh, how can I get me up to speed on this project?" And we handed over the documents that said, "There is no combat in this game. All these things, blah, 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 blah."
Oh my
So he was
god!
like, and he was like, "Wow, this is very." He's like, "This is very ambitious. You're doing all these things. You're not only, doing the storytelling and the reboot of Silent Hill 1, but you're also changing the combat and having a fully contiguous game with no loading screens. And you're also using the cell phone to replace all the UI screens." And we're like,
and he's like, "Yeah, carry
that's
on.
what we've been making. Yep. That's the plan we've been working to all
Since
this
day
time."
one.
So that's how we got to sneak that in. But it's been interesting because obviously there was then I think Amnesia was around the same time,
Right.
and now it's like actually ignoring like Resident Evil 2 remakes. Like the expectation of a horror game is that you're going to be running, or that there is that more often than not that's the thing. That's how horror works. Terrifying thing that's going to hurt you.
See, you were a trendsetter back then. You didn't even know it.
Well, I guess it was inevitable, but
All right, before we get into like listener questions and everything like that, I want to take a quick break and tell you about the sponsor, if we don't mind. Just take a couple of seconds here. This week, take a drink. Everybody chill for a minute. There's a lot to unpack there. I literally knew nothing about Silent Hill and now know way more than I could ever imagined I would have known about Silent Hill. So I'm having a blast just sitting here listening to this. But this week's sponsor, meltedpins.com. Ladies and gentlemen, you listen to the show, Melted Pins is here propping us up right there on the pedestal. Melted Pins, fantastic website. Sells unique and original tattoo art inspired pins, buttons, canvas bags, mugs, more, all that kind of stuff, much more. Artist Kelsey Lynn has done art for tons of different podcasts and websites, including ours. We trust her. Her designs are phenomenal. She's a really good person. So if you want to go and check out those awesome designs, go to meltedpins.com, use the checkout code NDSmelted, and you will get 10% off of your purchase. That's right, 10% off of your purchase. You can follow Melted Pins on all social media at Melted Pins. That's at Melted Pins on Twitter and Instagram. And one more time, that's meltedpins.com, promo code NDSmelted. Now, Andy, you may continue driving the train.
Well, I kind of want to get Sam's thoughts on Silent Hill today, and we had a glimmer of hope when Kojima was to make this franchise in a beautiful way. We got that lovely PT game, which still ranks high for me as one of my favorite horror experiences in a video game for a teaser or a tech demo, essentially. And then, sadly, his game went on to get canceled, Silent Hills, and we now have pachinko games, which is just a whole other kind of nightmare into itself. So I kind of want to get your thoughts on that. And also, we have a question from Buzz Killington, who asks, what would the story be if you wrote a Silent Hill pachinko game?
Oh wow, those are good questions. I'm gonna take the offer of a break because my AirPods are about to run out, and so I'm gonna swap it out for a headset. Otherwise,
all right, no problem.
It's gonna go disastrously wrong. So if you give me 1 minute to go grab a headset.
You do your thing.
We'll just talk about
think about yes, it's no problem.
Okay.
I can tell you one thing. Go ahead. You go get your headphones. Yep. I want to play Silent Hill now.
Oh, so this is going to go well into our new pilot episode, our pilot podcast.
Yes.
So
it is.
I think it's going to be fun to do a deep dive into this franchise. And you get to hear my lunacy, because hearing Sam speak about this series, and he mentions names and items and characters, and you're probably like, who the fuck are these people he's talking about? Travis, Lisa, Floros, and I'm just like, yep, yeah, that thing, sure, as I'm getting more and more wrecked by the minute as he's speaking. And I really think we've hit the gold mine here, because I haven't really heard this tale about a fry cook origin story for Pyramid Head. I have been on forums for a long time with the series, and I've read interviews, heard podcasts, watched YouTube interviews for many years, and this story, it blew my fucking mind. And
it really, I don't even know if it's Silent Hill that is the star of that story, but it's the true horror that is Konami. That is just the writing on the wall of just how awfully managed or mismanaged, we should say, that entire company was at that time. Like the 2000s on were just awful to them.
The scariest thing about this is just the corporate overreach when it comes to decision making, because you have games that sold well when they were decent games, but then when you have, because Silent Hill 3 wasn't supposed to be about an extension of the first game. It was going to be a whole unique storyline, much like the second installment. But Konami was saying, no, we want more of the cult and more of that aspect. So that was scrapped midway through for a whole other idea. So it's odd to see Konami just repeating, just getting this, putting their foot where it doesn't belong, and
straight in their own ass.
It's just, yeah, and you can see where the series went wrong and why it's a pachinko game today.
It seems like it became what was more important to Konami when it came to Silent Hill was keeping the brand in the zeitgeist as opposed to protecting the brand.
Or yeah, at the very least, striking while the iron's hot. Like, there's a chance to make money now. Let's use the IP that we own. Not let's make a good quality horror game.
Right. Or make a good quality game, period. And full stop. Because they didn't seem to be able to do that either. Try as they might.
Okay.
Good Lord.
Oh, he's back, baby.
All right.
We missed you.
You got me? Loud and clear?
Oh, you sound so sexy.
Loud and clear.
You sound better. So let's do the entire interview over from scratch.
Start over. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Nintendo Dual Screen. No. Oh, God.
We're going to reimagine the podcast.
Yes.
So you asked me a bunch of questions.
Yes. So Pachinko,
Kojima, and everything. Oh God, Pachinko.
It hurts your soul, doesn't it? In so many ways.
Because you don't really have stories, right? It's not even, I don't know, because I know pinball machines, right, have the little panel with the cool little LCD graphics that occasionally is fun.
Right.
But do pachinko machines even have
I know level? That the Patchy Slot games, that a lot of them have like FMV cutscenes.
Oh, okay.
When you figure certain combinations, it's like a little reward. So let's say someone said to you, Sam, give us a quick like pachinko game story we can just have running in the background, like when you win or when you have certain combinations. What would that look like?
So I guess I got to figure out what is the metaphor here. Like you got the balls and they're falling and then at the bottom you have the different slots, right? And you want to land in the good slot. So yeah, there's got to be a story there. There's these souls bouncing around in purgatory, I guess.
Right. Where else would they be?
Yeah, you can throw like a Groundhog Day thing there. Like, they're reliving over and over these traumatic events that are represented by the pins that they're bouncing off. I don't know. Yeah, that's as far as I would get.
Or you could just say, we're going to focus on the 7 deadly sins, or greed in particular, with the storyline.
That's meta.
Yeah, I don't know. I always think of pachinko levels are always surprisingly fun little novelties in other games, but going in the opposite direction. There's a cool one. Mario Sunshine had a cool pachinko level.
Yeah, it did.
The next question we have here is actually way more interesting, having now heard your stories of the two of Origins and Shattered Memories. This one's comes from the BT Maniac 90. Origins and Shattered Memories are completely different games. Which did you enjoy working on more, and why?
Honestly, I think Origins as a human being was probably more enjoyable because because like I said, we had because we were working to a existing structure, we weren't having to overthink that, and we were this was not going to be the ultimate Silent Hill game. Like we were just trying to make the thing as good as it could be, and it was a great team that was working incredibly hard, but it was a team that worked very well under that pressure. So that and it was like, oh my god, we're getting to work on Silent Hill. So that was like a thing, and there were all those constant frustrations. Whereas I think, from memory, Shattered Memories as a human being was very painful because it was very personal to me and was outrageously ambitious. So it was even more so a struggle to kind of execute on it. I remember there was, it was so intense. And as like when we were doing the motion capture, I think we had this setup whereby we would write some stuff. I'd go out to LA for 2 weeks to motion capture it, and then I'd come back to England for 2 weeks, go back to LA for 2 weeks. And this was around the time my first child was born. So I was writing this game about a father who may or may not have been a great father, and the relationship with his child. And then I was like constantly not in town and dealing with jet lag. So I remember being a very intense development period. To look back, Shattered Memories is the game that I'm most proud of and most interested in. But yeah, that doesn't always match up with what is the most pleasurable experience development-wise. And I felt like, I think you said earlier that like the thing we did with combat was a bit cheeky, right? A bit sneaky.
Very sneaky.
And that whole game was a lot of sneaky. It was like, these are all these cool things I want to do, and I can't be entirely upfront about them all. So there was a lot of sneaky to get things done. So it was we were constantly kind of hedging, pushing our luck, trying to get stuff done on that game. And we were there going, well, yeah, this whole thing is going to be contiguous world, and we won't have loading screens because they suck. And we're going to have this cool flash, and it's got motion controls, and we were doing lots of things, and we knew that it was ambitious, overly ambitious, but we kind of felt like this was our big swing, and so we should do everything. We should. At that point, I was always more impressed by people trying stuff, even if it didn't work, than kind of taking the easy road. So that's what we were doing on Shattered Memories.
All right, and I think the best way we can wrap this up is with one simple question, or not so simple question. Sam, if you found yourself in Silent Hill, what would it look like for you?
It definitely wouldn't be rusty and bloody, which is my constant argument. Because on Hill 2, it was wet and there were sheets, and it was different because it represents the person who's in it. And it doesn't always just have to be rusty and bloody. Well, so here you go. This is an interesting thing. So my family moved out to Tanzania in Africa. We were there for a couple of years. My dad was a road engineer, and they were building a road out in the middle of nowhere in Tanzania. And whilst we were out there, I, as a kid, was terrified of baboons. They're a very scary animal, especially to a child, with their big teeth and their weird asses. And so I was always terrified of the baboons. And there was a swimming pool that we would very occasionally get to go to, because we kind of lived out in the middle of nowhere where this road was being built, but there was some, like, I guess, colonial country club stuff nearer the bigger towns that we would occasionally get to go to. And there was this swimming pool. I remember as a kid, we went to the swimming pool and a whole pack of baboons climbed over the fence. And I remember being chased around the swimming pool by these baboons whilst the adults watched and laughed, is my memory of it. They didn't try and save me. They just watched and laughed. So flash forward, we're making shattered memories. And I've been like briefing concept people on this is what the monsters should look like. And, you know, they're these creatures that are kind of on all fours chasing after you. And we had this whole idea with the chase mechanic that you were going to be able to look over your shoulder. Because we're like, if you're running away from something in a video game, that's not interesting, scary, because you can't see the stuff you're running away from. So we were like, oh, what if we have like a rear view mirror, essentially, allow the player to look over their shoulder to see the creatures that are chasing them. But the animators would complain, because they'd be like, if you have these creatures running on all fours and they're humanoid-ish, when you look over your shoulder, camera-wise, it's really hard to fully see them. Like, they're going to be too short. But I was like insistent, no, they have to have this slightly animalistic kind of pose. The level designers were building the first of our chase levels, and one of the locations was a swimming pool. And I remember doing a level review of it, and I was getting really specific about how this swimming pool should be laid out and the size of it and what it should feel like. And we're testing it, and we're running around the swimming pool with these creatures that I've insisted be on all fours and slight. I think we had like a variant that was slightly hairy. And that was when I suddenly recreate the experience of being chased around the swimming pool as a child by these baboons. And
were the adults not worried at all that these baboons would tear your arms off? Because I'm pretty sure baboons could tear children's arms off.
Yeah.
I think I have asked my parents since, like, what was the deal with the baboons? Because my memory is that you all just laughed. And I don't think I've ever had a good answer out of them. And I'm also like, why didn't I jump into, I don't know, if I jumped in the water, would they have stopped? I don't know. Stop following me. But so certainly like that sequence, those elements, and I think we ended up having to have them not be on all fours so that you could see them, so they do run more upright. But certainly that was the nightmare. And again, like all the meetings, I was like, no, the essence of horror is the chase. Like all your childhood nightmares are being chased and you can't get away, and it's, you know. And then I'm like, oh shit, no, running round and around the swimming pool being chased by a pack of baboons. That is the thing I've been trying to create. So certainly that would be in there. So there is already a hint of that in the Silent Hill world. But yeah, there'd be all sorts.
Alice in Wonderland scares me. It always scared me as a kid, so I think mine would probably look like that. It would be like just weird funhouse type shit. Like, oh, the
creakiest thing in Alice in Wonderland is the little pig child. Remember that? There's a baby, and the nurse is being mean to the baby, and Alice is like, stop being mean to the baby. And then she picks it up, and then she realizes it's a little piglet in baby clothes that she's holding.
I don't like any of that stuff. That's just like the
wrong.
shrinking, the growing, the why are you late? What are you late for? But you're not late. You're late, but you're not late.
When she grows and she's stuck in the house and she throws the new lizard boy out.
It's nightmare inducing. I swear.
Yeah.
It used to give me straight up anxiety. I remember there's this place just off of Central Park called Alice's Teacup. Andy, I don't know if you've been there, but you okay? I walked in there and it just like everything just kind of clicked in my brain. It was like, oh no, this is where anxiety lives. I forgot about this. I don't like this at all. I'll have my blueberry scone, my coffee, and I'm out of here.
One of my favorite horror short stories there's a poem that I think is in Alice in Wonderland, right? That is the Walrus and the Carpenter, something like that. And it's this creepy little limerick about eating oysters. And I think it's like sinister because they talk and they're being nice to the oysters and they eat them or something. But there is a short story that takes that rhyme and transposes it on the real world, and it's probably online if you Google it. It's the freak. It's like I don't know. It's like a Californian beach scene, and there's like a bunch of friends out with like a little fire on the beach at night, and these two guys come up and start talking about eating oysters, and then I think it's really disturbing.
I just gotta chill. I don't like it. I think that's gonna send us to the end of the show. I think this was absolutely awesome, and if you didn't love or even care much about Silent Hill, I would be you would be lying if you didn't get intrigued by this whole conversation, because I know I was. I've only played it in passing, like, and stuff like that. So now I think I might have to revisit some of these games. If Konami likes money, they would remaster these bad boys. That would be nice.
Oh, don't talk about Silent Hill remasters.
They did that. That's a whole other nightmare unto itself.
A whole other ball of wax. That'll bring us to the end. If you want to follow our show on social media, you can do so. We are at NDSPodcast. That's at NDSPodcast on Twitter and Instagram. I am at Batchild27. Andy, you are at Pantsky. Sam, where can everybody find you?
I'm on Twitter. I am at MR Sam Barlow, Mr. Sam Barlow, which I think I picked when it was like there was already some Sam Barlows out there, so I thought if I put Mr. on the front, that would help.
It definitely distinguishes you.
It led to a lot of people misreading me as Mrs. Am Barlow and thinking that I was a female Asian lady, which I'm not. But
Sam, I want to buy you a drink. I know you're based in the same state as we are. It's gonna happen. I want to buy you several drinks, sir.
There are many more stories that we need to hear.
Yes, for sure.
You'll hear the rest.
If you want to
bring the concept art.
Oh, good.
Concept art. Oh man. Andy, you just made a best friend. I could tell.
I really did.
I'm gonna lose you to Sam Barlow now. That's what's gonna happen. All right, if you want to join our Facebook group, you can do so. We are facebook.com/groups/NDSpodcast. And we also stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/dualscreenstreams. And we also have a channel called Nintendo Dual Screens on YouTube. You could search for that, hit the follow button, and all that stuff. This episode that you're listening to may or may not already be listening. You may be listening on YouTube. And if so, thank you. Give a thumbs up, leave a comment, hit the subscribe button. We post the show each and every Monday for your listening pleasure. Do it. Special thanks to our contributors, Zazu Pitts of Sour Note Productions, for our theme song 16-Bit Attack, who, Andy, Zazu is in New York this weekend.
Okay, so we're buying all the drinks now?
And
Is that what's happening?
he asked
Gotta
if
get
if
Sam
we
drinks,
had
get
time
Zazu drinks.
to hang out. I know. He asked
All right.
if either of us were around. I don't know if I will be, but I don't know. He's in town now. Matt Murray, thank you for our Twitch art, Twitch overlays and whatnot. Dan Colonna of Dinosaur Machines Podcast, Hit Buttons Gaming, and twitch.tv/Dan O'Mac for our beautiful Nintendo Dual Screens logo, which we've been using ever since the show's inception. And Andrew Douglas for all of our podcast art, including the art for this very episode, which, whoo, baby, can't wait. Oh, I can't wait. He's been knocking these things out of the park, getting a lot of compliments on the art. So thank you, Andrew. And you can follow him at Angimoto, ANGIMOTO. You could email us if you'd like, feedback at NDSPodcast.com. And remember, actually, you know what, Andy, why don't you, before I tell the kids what they can remember, you let us know if you have anything else you want to tell the kids before we go.
Yeah, I want to thank all of our guests that came on this month for Halloween and for a whole horror celebration. Sam, you're awesome, dude. I think you were the best way to end this month. You put the nice little period there, or the exclamation point of horror at the end of this
the period
series of
head
episodes.
No.
I always try and pay attention to the ending. The ending is the
That's
key,
really
yeah.
true. So yeah, I mean, just that, and I'm really spent. This month kind of was a lot for us. We did more episodes than we usually do, and November can wait a little longer, as far as I'm concerned. So we'll announce things when we're feeling up to it.
Yeah, pay attention to our Twitter because we have a lot of stuff going on. Before we go, I do want to tell you, yes, it is still going on. So from October 24th, which is past when you're hearing this, but through Halloween, I am doing a charity fundraiser. I'm trying to raise money for this local charity to me. It's called Brooklyn Animal Action. And I had said this on the episode before, but when my cat got very sick, they're a charity organization that rescues stray kittens, vets them, and gets them adopted. They're a fantastic organization. There's a lot of them out there, but the reason why this one is special to me and us here at Nintendo Dual Screens and DualScreens.com is because my cat Elliot had gotten sick at the same time that we brought in these two stray kittens, and Brooklyn Animal Action was helping us, get those two kittens vetted. And then when my cat got sick, they kind of jumped in and offered to get all sorts of testing done for him and all this other stuff. And it wound up he had a ridiculously aggressive form of cancer, which we wound up not treating because it was attacking his bone marrow and he wasn't going to be able to survive any treatment. And Brooklyn Animal Action fitted not only all of the testing for that, but they also graciously cremated him and gave us the ashes and the paw print and like the whole night, and even paid for the euthanasia and all of that stuff. And I cannot say thank you enough to them. So I want to do this event. So if you go to our Twitch page, we have a tip us image there that I actually changed to say Brooklyn Animal Action. Anything that we get in the month of October, I'm going to donate to them. And we haven't gone live with this thing really right away. So hopefully there's some money in there now, but as of right now, we haven't really started. But I just wanted to let you know that we're going to be doing that. And of course, we're going to be doing Extra Life stuff for the month of November. But that's it, folks. This has been Nintendo Dual Screens episode 124 for the week of October 28th. Nintendo Dual Screens is completed. It is finally ended. Sam, thank you so much for joining us, man. This was absolutely fantastic. I'm so happy you came on the show.
I enjoyed myself. Happy Halloween.
Anytime you want to come on the show again, you let us know. You shoot us text.
It's gonna happen now.
Oh, it's gonna happen. I kind of just want. You know what I really would like to do? I want to just sit down and play a Silent Hill game with you. I think that's what I want to do. I think we're gonna have to make that happen at some point when you're in the city.
Do the Game Boy one.
Ooh. Oh boy.
Oh no.
Oh boy. If you want to listen to this episode's pre and or post show shenanigans, head over to patreon.com/NDSPodcast, where you can get an extra half hour to hour of content each and every week, including those pre and post shows. All right, until next time, thank you, Sam. Thank you, Andy. And as always, please be excellent to each other.